It may have looked like a boxing story on the surface, but in truth, it was something far deeper, a love story, a tale of sacrifice, and of a life that demanded to be remembered. Yet somewhere along the way, silence fell over their name. Not because they were unimportant, but because someone made sure the world looked the other way. Once, she was everywhere, gracing red carpets with a dazzling smile, stealing hearts on the big screen, radiating promise and fire. But fame is a fleeting companion, and over time, her light seemed to dim. The world moved on, and her name slipped quietly into obscurity. Today, if her face appears in a headline, it sparks not applause but puzzled recognition, and perhaps even a twinge of guilt. What happened to her? Where did she vanish, and why does the very question feel so heavy? Some stories don't end with credits rolling, they fade, piece by piece, until only a haunting silence remains. How does someone so present in our lives suddenly fade into absence? To understand, we must start at the beginning. Clint Eastwood's story didn't begin with fame or flashing cameras, it began in San Francisco in 1930, when he entered the world at over 11 pounds, so large the hospital staff nicknamed him Samson. His childhood was spent moving across California before his family finally settled in the quiet, tree-lined streets of Piedmont. At that time, Eastwood wasn't a Hollywood hopeful or a star in the making, he was just a tall, quiet boy trying to find his way. After school, he worked ordinary jobs, lifeguard, grocery clerk, roles that gave no hint of the legend he would one day become. However, life has a way of revealing unexpected opportunities. During Clint's time at Fort or while serving in the Army, an unforeseen event took place. A man named Chuck Hill, who had ties to Hollywood and was acquainted with Clint prior, crossed paths with him once more. Hill saw potential in Clint, not necessarily in his acting skills at that moment, but in his overall presence. He connected Clint with a cameraman from Universal Studios named Irving Glassberg, who set up an audition for him. Unfortunately, the first audition didn't go as smoothly as hoped. The director, Arthur Lubin, appreciated Clint's height and rugged appearance but felt his acting needed significant improvement. Still, Lubin was impressed enough to offer him a small contract worth $100 a week, advising him to take acting classes if he was serious about pursuing a career in acting. Clint agreed. At first, things were challenging. He felt awkward in front of the camera, his mannerisms were stiff, and he delivered his lines through clenched teeth, a habit that lingered. Yet, despite these early challenges, there was an undeniable quality about him. Perhaps it was his calm, steadfast energy. Or maybe it was the subtle toughness he exuded effortlessly. Eventually, his breakthrough arrived with the television series Rawhide in the late 1950s. He portrayed a cowboy named Rowdy Yates, and audiences began to take notice. The show ran for several years, giving Clint the experience and exposure he needed. This was the beginning of his journey. No grand spectacles, no dramatic moments, just a slow and steady rise of someone who was once a complete unknown. Clint Eastwood didn't achieve fame in an instant. He built his career gradually and quietly. In his personal life, Clint Eastwood didn't just forge a decades-long career in Hollywood. He also navigated a life filled with intricate personal choices, especially in matters of romance. Over the years, he had many women in his life, some casually and others more seriously. Many of Clint Eastwood's relationships unfolded quietly, away from flashing cameras and headlines. His first marriage was to Margaret Neville Johnson, a fitness instructor he met on a blind date and wed in 1953. But even before and during this marriage, Clint's private life was far more complicated. In 1954, an early affair resulted in the birth of his daughter, Lori, who was placed for adoption. Clint never spoke openly about it, and details about Lori's mother remained shrouded in silence. While still married to Johnson, Clint entered a long-term relationship with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis. Their romance, lasting from 1959 to 1973, brought another daughter into the world, Kimber, born in 1964. Though unconventional, their bond endured well beyond their romance, remaining strong until Roxanne's passing in 2023. Clint and Johnson later welcomed 2 children, Kyle, born in 1968, and Allison, who arrived in 1972. Their marriage spanned several decades, though it was not the norm. Johnson seemed to tolerate Clint's way of life, but they ultimately divorced in 1984. Following that, Clint's subsequent marriages raised eyebrows. In a discreet relationship with flight attendant Jaceline Reeves, Clint fathered two more children, Scott in 1986 and Catherine in 1988. The affair was not widely known at the time, leaving the children technically without a father for several years. However, they eventually acknowledged Clint as their dad, and Scott even began to mirror his father's behavior. In the 1990s, Clint was romantically involved with actress Frances Fisher, and they had a daughter named Francesca in 1993. Then, in 1996, he tied the knot again, this time with television news anchor Dina Ruiz. Together, they had a daughter, Morgan, who was also born that same year. This marriage endured for nearly 20 years before concluding in divorce in 2014. Clint Eastwood rarely talks about his family during interviews. He has noted that while he can handle the spotlight, his children do not seek that attention. Perhaps this is why, despite being one of Hollywood's most recognized figures, much of Clint's personal life remains elusive, complex, and largely unaddressed amid the behind-the-scenes drama. In 2008, two filmmaking giants, Spike Lee and Clint Eastwood, found themselves in a public dispute, igniting a passionate discussion about race, historical accuracy, and representation in cinema. The controversy began when Lee voiced his concerns regarding Eastwood's acclaimed war films, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, both released in 2006. Although Lee condemned what he saw as a glaring paucity of black soldiers, Eastwood's skill was never questioned. During the Cannes Film Festival that year, Lee, who is renowned for his unwavering opinions on race and narrative, expressed his opinions clearly. He maintained that black Marines had been omitted from World War II history by Eastwood. According to Lee, a basic depiction would have recognized the significant number of African Americans who fought and lost their lives in Yuma. Eastwood responded without hesitation. In public, he retaliated by saying that a man like him ought to keep his mouth shut. He defended himself by claiming that his films were based on real-life occurrences, especially the flag-raising ceremony on Mount Suribachi, which was attended only by white soldiers. According to Eastwood, it would be incorrect to introduce black people in places where they haven't existed in the past. However, the controversy didn't stop there. The story was picked up by the media very quickly. In defense of Lee, others said that filmmakers should depict the larger reality rather than discrete scenes. Others stood forward to support Eastwood's vision, asserting that narrative accuracy is made possible by creative freedom and a focus on particular events. However, the two directors' confrontation was about more than just cinema. It expanded into a more widespread cultural phenomena. It reminded me of an old Hollywood argument. Whose stories are excluded and who gets to tell history? The discussion forced viewers to consider what they see on screen and the gaps that are constantly overlooked more carefully. The two guys remained resolute in their careers despite the stress. Many saw Lee's obvious response to the controversy in Miracle at St. Anna, a film about black troops during World War II that was released in the same year. In contrast, Eastwood continued to make films based on real-life historical events while defending his choices. The conflict, in retrospect, wasn't between two directors with different viewpoints. It had to do with how we interpret the past. The dispute caused controversy, both for what was written and for what it stood for. It served as a reminder that narratives are not always objective and that the storyteller's perspective can occasionally be just as significant as the content. The criticism of Richard Jules's most contentious scene. Arguments concerning race, historical authenticity, and screen representation erupted in 2008 after a public feud between two aggressive filmmakers, Spike Lee and Clint Eastwood. It began when Lee took issue with Eastwood's 2006 release of the critically acclaimed war films Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Yuma. Although Lee criticized what he saw as a flagrant error, Eastwood's talent as a director was never questioned. There was no representation of black soldiers. At the Cannes Film Festival that year, Lee made his intentions clear due to his unwavering views on race and story. He felt that Eastwood had wiped off the history of black Marines during World War II. Lee stated that many African-Americans fought and lost their lives in Iwo, implying that their contribution would have been acknowledged even with a minimal representation. Eastwood responded without holding back. "A guy like him should shut his face," he publicly retorted, justifying his action by claiming that his films were based on specific documented events, specifically the fabled flag raising on Mount Suribachi, which was attended by only white servicemen, to Eastwood, adding black characters where none had previously existed. Inaccurate, but the media quickly took hold of the story. While some critics supported Lee, arguing that filmmakers must portray the wider reality rather than just particular moments, others defended Eastwood's artistic vision, arguing that artistic freedom and focus on particular events allow for narrative fidelity. However, the dispute between the two directors was more than just a film transmuting into a larger cultural moment. Although tension was high, the two men pursued their careers without hindrance. The debate forced viewers to consider what they are watching on the screen and the holes that go unnoticed, and it highlighted a long-standing question in Hollywood: who gets to narrate history and whose histories are left behind? While Eastwood continued to make films based on real-life events that he remained adamant about, Lee's release of Miracle at St. Anna that same year, a film about black war veterans during World War II, was widely seen as his direct response to the controversy. In hindsight, the feud was more than just two directors arguing. Clint Eastwood's untold love stories. Clint Eastwood's dignified silver screen persona belies a naughty mess of covert love affairs, hidden fatherhood, and psychological devastation that scarred numerous women in his life. The argument shook not only because of what was being said, but also because of what it represented. It reminded us that history isn't always objective, and sometimes who narrates counts as much as the narrative itself. His personal life told a very different story, one of adultery, abandonment, and deceit, while the world applauded his macho swagger and Taciturn Western heroes. At the heart of this agonizing story was Roxanne Tunis, a stunt woman on the Rawhide set, with whom Clint had a covert affair for 14 years. All the while still married to his first wife, Maggie Johnson. Their relationship was not a quick fad, rather, it lasted for more than 10 years, concealed from the public and even from Maggie. Roxanne gave birth to Clint's daughter, Kimber, in 1964, but he was surprisingly unaware of her birth until nearly a year later. Clint Eastwood proceeded to father at least 8 children with 6 different women, including Lori, Kimber, Scott, Catherine, Francesca, Kyle, Allison, and Morgan. And when he did, he kept her life a secret, only catching glimpses of her every few months, as if she were a secret to be controlled instead of a child to be cherished. Some of the children were born from concurrent relationships, meaning that Clint was seeing several women at the same time, and each of them was either unaware of the others or, worse, was left to endure the betrayal in silence. Some of the children, like Lori, were adopted out and reunited with Eastwood just decades later after years of wondering what their father might be like. Others, like Scott and Francesca, grew up in broken homes with their father's renowned name but not always his care or attention. Many of his children didn't come out to the public until tabloids exposed the truth, forcing the women and kids to face the emotional rubble in a spotlight that was too hot to handle. In a story that taints the reputation of one of Hollywood's greatest nicknames, Maggie Johnson, the devoted wife who had supported Clint for years, had to face the heartbreaking truth that her husband had not only cheated but had built entire secret lives and families in her absence. Clint Eastwood is considered the ultimate tough guy in movies, but some of his real-life stories reveal a very different, darker story. In the shadow of the spotlight, he left behind not only a legacy of cinematic legend, but also a severely damaged family history of vows broken, children hidden away, and women who silently carried the scars he left behind. Beyond the charisma and stardom, a very different reality seems to haunt him. Eastwood's first wife, Maggie Johnson, was with him for decades, but their marriage was anything but idyllic. Fans have praised his slick demeanor and legendary film career, but his life with the women closest to him has caused great alarm. Clint allegedly physically abused Maggie, and one incident stands out in horrific detail, according to a memoir-style account published by the Irish Independent. The report states that during one violent argument, Eastwood knocked her across the bathroom so hard that she crashed into a tub. This was not an isolated incident, rather, it seems to reflect a pattern of violence and ingrained tension in their relationship. Imagine the pain and anxiety Maggie must have felt, remaining silent while the world celebrated her husband as a hero. But it didn't stop there. Clint Eastwood and actress Sandra Lockcatch had a highly public romance for over 10 years, but what seemed to be a power couple on the surface turned into something much more sinister behind the scenes. In multiple public declarations, Locke characterized Eastwood as domineering, manipulative, and emotionally abusive, claiming that during their relationship, he forced her to have 2 abortions and then a tubal ligation, rendering her effectively infertile. "I had visions of starting a family, but they were shattered under the stress of pressure," Locke explained, "not because I wanted to, but because my husband Clint didn't wish for more children." She described feeling trapped, gaslight, and helpless, and how Eastwood used his influence and power to stifle her when she tried to flee. These are not stories of bad breakups. Eastwood denied the accusations of coercion, but the emotional distress that Locke made public still taints her reputation. After the relationship ended, Eastwood allegedly locked her out of the house they shared, an act she called a final cruelty. Their court battles lasted for years. They serve as a reminder that fame can conceal a lot and that sometimes the most eerie stories take place far from the public eye. When Sandra met Clint. In the fall of 1975, Sandra Lockcatch and Clint Eastwood started dating while filming The Outlaw Josie Wales. Their stories about violence, force, and domination from women who once adored a man the world considered a legend. Locke would later recall in a documentary, "It was just an immediate attraction between the two of us." They had met before, when Lockcatch had tried out for a part in Eastwood's Breezy, but nothing had come of it until they found themselves together again in Page, Arizona. They had sex at the end of their first date, which was the beginning of one of Hollywood's most intense and shocking relationships. Eastwood was still married to Maggie Johnson at the time, but according to all accounts, the two had been emotionally distant for years. He didn't spend much time at Johnson's Pebble Beach estate, and Hollywood insiders knew that they were married. Screenwriter Philip Kaufman was pursuing her, but she chose Eastwood, and the two began splitting their time between his homes in Carmel and Sherman Oaks, as well as leased properties in San Francisco and Tiburon. Eastwood told Locke that he had never been in love before, even singing to her a song he called "She Made Me Monogamous." Later, they rented a bare house on Stradella Road that would be associated with them for years to come. The early years of their affair were calm, passionate, and full of the excitement of two artists falling deeply in love, though it would not be made public until 1977. Locke used to say she had never experienced love like that before. Sandra Locke was Clint Eastwood's partner for years, both on and off screen, but their 13-year relationship ended in a storm of legal drama that would cost her more than just love. In April 1989, while she was writing her film Impulse, Locke received a heartwarming letter. And even though what followed was a firestorm, that beginning was unquestionably beautiful. The letter, written coldly to be with Mrs. Gordon Anderson, left Locke reeling, and she fainted after reading it. Clint's lawyers had changed the locks on their bare house, packed up her belongings, and denied her entry. She immediately filed a palimony suit, accusing Eastwood of financial abandonment, emotional distress, forced eviction, and even wiretapping. After decades of psychological manipulation, Locke was fighting for more than just financial assistance, she was fighting for respect and dignity. The court case became a public drama as she demanded justice and compensation, and after 19 exhausting months, Eastwood quietly dropped the case. Locke received 2 houses, $450,000 in cash, and most importantly, ASA $1.5 million development deal with Warner Brothers, which was supposed to help her transition from actress to director, seemed like a win until the harsh reality set in. Locke submitted over 3 dozen film ideas to Warner Brothers between 1990 and 1993, all of which were turned down. She would later discover that the studio deal had been discreetly funded by Eastwood himself and was never meant to advance her career. It was, in her opinion, a sham, a way to muzzle her and prevent further legal repercussions. Locke sued again, this time for fraud, but the door was firmly closed despite her success and ability. While Eastwood insisted on her innocence, Locke firmly stated that her battle wasn't about money. In 1996, she claimed that the development agreement had been a front, a smoke-yack screen, meant to silence her and prevent her career from ever moving forward. Her testimony was later corroborated by internal affidavit, which showed Warner never intended to produce her material. "This was never about money," she clarified, "it was about fighting for my professional rights." However, the damage was done, her career never recovered its momentum, and the Oscar-nominated woman who had been on the verge of becoming a famous director faded into obscurity. Sandra Locke was a star, a golden girl who lit up the screen in the 1970s and 1980s, but behind that brilliant smile, behind the charm and celebrity, was a woman whose life slowly fell apart in secret suffering. Her story serves as a bitter reminder of how easily power can stifle even the best talent in Hollywood. The silent battle. In 1990, Locke was diagnosed with breast cancer, a devastating event in a life already rife with emotional scars, many of which were connected to her tumultuous romance with Clint Eastwood. She didn't just fade away from the spotlight, she slipped away under the weight of pain, betrayal, and a body that kept failing her. She endured a double mastectomy, a physically and emotionally taxing procedure, to add to the heartache, but she persisted, fought in silence, and when she recovered, she refused to give in to sympathy. Instead, she remained strong, stoic, and private. However, cancer has a nasty way of returning. And it did. Slowly, quietly, and devastatingly, it spread to her bones, and over the years, her health steadily declined. Friends reported that she suffered from progressive frailty, and there were rumors of other ailments, including anemia, chronic fatigue, and shortness of breath. Every day became more challenging. Sandra never brought the world into her pain. She died in her Los Angeles home on November 3, 2018, from cardiac arrest brought on by her battles with breast and bone cancer. She was 74 years old, but in a world obsessed with celebrities where everyone reads headlines and gets news instantly, no one did. Not for 41 days. Every breath was a little harder, and there was still no public statement or great declaration. Her death was reported to the authorities, but for some reason, the public didn't find out until mid-December. There were no social media reactions or tributes, and it was only announced quietly by Radar Online, which made it seem more like a whisper than a headline. Clint Eastwood never confirmed her death by the time his film The Mule was released. Her passing was more than just a passing, it was an erasure. The industry did not pay tribute to her on television or offer condolences, and she was left out of the Academy Awards' Heartfelt in Memoriam segment, which honors all the deceased each year. Her ashes were given to Gordon Anderson, her longtime friend and de facto legal husband, whom she had always supported emotionally and financially. In the end, she left him her estimated $20 million fortune, so the one person who had stuck by her had something to hold on to, but the silence around her passing, the media blackout, the unanswered questions, the silent friends, seemed callous, and some wondered if she had requested it. Maybe she didn't want the world to see how vulnerable she was, maybe she wanted to die quietly, or maybe, just maybe, she didn't think anyone would notice after all the pain she had endured. Clint Eastwood's, 95, quietly changes. Clint Eastwood, 95, still refuses to retire. Even when fans suspected his 2024 release Juror Range 2 would be his swan music as a director, Eastwood made one element apparent. He is a long way from done. Eastwood reiterated his conviction in current interviews that creativity isn't something that runs out with age and that he has greater memories to share. Even as he has maintained a low profile over the last few years, Eastwood became noticed publicly in Carmel by the Sea, where he owns and regularly remains on the picturesque Task Ranch. The sighting turned into months after his longtime partner, Christina Sandera, exceeded away in July of 2024. The demise was subdued with Eastwood stepping out of the public eye for a while to mourn in seclusion. Notwithstanding the emotional strain, Eastwood has retained his bodily and mental vigor. He is stated to comply with a vegetarian weight loss plan, exercise with golf and on foot, and meditate and do yoga to hold his power levels sharp. His son, Scott Eastwood, become recently quoted as saying that his father is satisfactory and nevertheless the equal determined, down-to-earth guy he continually turned into. There have also been whispers that Clint is already inside the initial degrees of working on any other movie. Even at 95, he is resisting Hollywood's current fixation on franchises and remakes, calling alternatively for daring, original storytelling. Clint Eastwood is at domestic in California these days with the earth, loved ones, and a legacy he spent decades cultivating. He won't be pursuing the limelight, but he's some distance from performed. Pensively and as usually with grit, Eastwood writes the subsequent page of his legendary career. In the long run, Sandra Locke's existence reads like a Hollywood script. Tremendous, complicated, and quietly tragic. She was more than Clint Eastwood's associate, extra than the position she played in the front of the camera. She became a female who dared to love deeply, create boldly, and fight lower back whilst the gadget tried to silence her. From her early rise as an Oscar-nominated actress to the years she spent locked in felony and emotional battles, Sandra carried herself with a sort of grace that in no way made the headlines but left a permanent mark on those who paid interest. Her silence and demise become as haunting as her voice in existence. No public tributes, no heartfelt eulogies, just a call on a demise certificate and a glaring omission from Themis in memoriam. It felt just like the world tried to erase her once more. But her legacy lingers now not best within the movie she made with Eastwood, but in her courage to speak up, to demand her really worth, to hold effective guys responsible in a time while only a few girls dared. Even after all of the ache, the contamination, the betrayal, the heartbreak, she chose now not to make noise. She disappeared just as quietly as she had lived her final years. But that does not imply we ought to neglect her. Sandra Locke became an image of resistance in an industry that not often forgives girls who keep off. She was inclined however fierce, broken however unbowed. Clint Eastwood may additionally have been the legend, however Sandra become the soul of the story. And perhaps in that quiet absence, in that final silence, she made her loudest announcement of all. She become here. She mattered. And her tale deserves to be remembered. If this story touched you, you're now not on my own. Sandra Locke's life become complete of expertise, ache, and power. And her reality deserves to be remembered. Tell us in the feedback, do you suspect she ever got the justice she deserved? In case you need greater untold Hollywood tales, like this video, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you by no means omit a new upload. Thank you for watching and recollect, each big name has a story.